Well, in the Refill Coalition, I would love to have all of our previous members. So we have had members who've been in and left. So M&S, Sainsbury's, Morrison's. I'd love to have them back in. I'd love to have Tesco and the Co-op, who've never been part of it, as well as part of maybe smaller organisations like Budgens and Spar. You know, they have a lot of outlets. So we've got Ocado, Aldi, Waitrose, and CHEP with us at the minute. And we just need to get it live in September. And then I honestly think the rest of the market will, you know, if we can prove this works, then why wouldn't they follow suit?
We are on an adventure to unite the stories and solutions of the pioneers, creating a better future for all. Together, we will journey to every continent, every country and community, and ask the question, what is the future you dream of? We will explore the blockers to us getting there, and we will ask, what will it take? What do we need? What do you need to create a future where we all thrive in balance and harmony with nature and each other? In this episode, we adventure with the pioneer of zero waste, Catherine Conway. Catherine's is an inspiring story of persistence, commitment, and resilience. Values that all founders need. Catherine's instincts lead her to be truly collaborative, and like all great impact pioneers, she prioritizes impact and doing the right thing. We adventure through circular economy, behavior change, collaboration, and policy. We tackle short-termism and explore the need for longer-term thinking. Together, we will explore the journey of Catherine's early career. Spoiler, Catherine started very grassroots in a market stall. We will follow her path through working with Planet Organic and pioneering zero waste in-store through to working with Waitrose and then setting up the Refill Coalition, which is Catherine and her co-collaborators' mission to transform our retail ecosystem to be truly zero waste. Listen to the end to hear Catherine's big dream and where she wants to impact next. Let's get into it.
I'd love to introduce you to someone that I've known for a very long time and who I love dearly, and who among the trailblazers is a trailblazer and has pioneered her space from the very beginning, being on a market stall through to now corralling all the major supermarkets, probably not all, but many of the major supermarkets, into zero waste, and has pioneered zero waste and the zero waste space. So if you don't already know who I'm going to introduce you to, it's Catherine Conway from Unpackaged, a tremendous pioneer and someone it gives me the great pleasure to welcome today to share her vision for the future that we can all love. And then I know that we'll get some really good challenges and blockers, but also some solutions that you're working on as well. So lovely to welcome you, Kath.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Would you like a little bit to set the scene? Like, who are you? What's your positionality? Where are you from? Like, what do you do?
So I founded Unpackaged 17 years ago because I was just somebody who wanted to do something about what I saw was the growing problem of single-use packaging. So I used to go to this little refill shop. Well, I didn't go to a refill shop because refill shops didn't exist. I went to a health food shop and refilled Ecover products. And then I went to a market stall and refilled an olive oil bottle. And I had to go to all of these different places to try and refill things. And nowhere could I go to refill dry goods. And I remember just sitting there one day in my flat, having bought a load of sort of packaged organic goods, put them into jars. And then I just sat there with packaging in my hands. And I just said, this is crazy. Why isn't there one shop where I can go and refill everything? So that's where the idea for Unpackaged was born. And I told my family about it. And my mum phoned me up one day and said, I woke up in the middle of the night and I realized it's got to be called Unpackaged. And I said, Mum, you're right. It absolutely does have to be called Unpackaged. And thus it was born. And so I got a very small grant from a brilliant organization called Unlimited, who I don't know if they still exist, but they used to fund people who had a good idea in their community. And they used to give sort of under $5,000 to someone who just had an idea to do something good. So I took that, set up a market stall. Then I ended up with 2 market stalls. And then I sort of thought I had enough to open a shop. But in those days, you know, I say that we were the first modern zero waste shop because we were in that sense, but I didn't call it a zero waste shop because it wasn't really a thing. You know, there wasn't that much about circular economy. I used to collect every article I could find in the newspaper about packaging because there were so few articles. So it was a lonely world to be in, but it was a world full of lovely producers of products that I could go directly to and buy things in bulk. So I went from 2 market stalls to a shop. We had to move to a bigger shop. We took a little bit of a wrong turning and added a restaurant onto it, which I think I can own it and say the restaurant was a failure. We didn't execute it well enough. Nearly took the whole business down with us because we had to close the site. But by that point, I was probably about 7 or 8 years in, and I still just looked around me and thought, I haven't even scratched the surface of the problem of packaging. By that point, other zero waste shops were setting up. The girls in Berlin were setting up. There was stuff in Italy. So it felt like there was the start of something happening. So I had a rethink. And at that moment, I realized I had to start working with supermarkets and brands and the big guns. From having said I was never going to do it because I believe in independent trade and all of these things, I just realized that I need to go to where the major problem is. So we did a deal with Planet Organic, who've been amazing partners ever since. Despite their recent troubles, I really hope they're getting back on their feet. And the team at Planet Organic said, come and set up Unpackaged as a concession within one of our stores. And if it does well enough, we'll increase it into all of our stores. And we are now in pretty much all of their stores. And that was our first foray into working within someone else's business. And we grew from there, then did the big Waitrose project, and sort of from there have become, I guess, consultants into the reuse and refill space. I guess we're system agnostic. We're known for refill in store, so places where people come with their own containers to fill up. But really, there's lots and lots of different reuse and refill models. And our job is to go in and work with clients and say, what's the product? What's the customer? What's the use case? What's the environment in which this system's going to exist? And then try and help them develop the best reuse or refill system for their product. So that's the last 17 years of my life.
In a nutshell. And also, I mean, there's so much more to that as well, I feel. It's interesting to notice that we had Brad from Willycroft, which is it's a vegan cheese company. And again, he similar to you, saw a problem, went to solve it. And I love that approach that you had. It was like, actually, you can't ignore it. You just had to get into it and had to solve it. And this sort of idea of constant iteration, constant sort of searching for the best way to have an impact. And it's not, for me, it's not, same with Future Planet. It is a community, but it's also like actually what we're doing is searching for the best iteration of how we can have an impact. And same with Unpackaged. You do consulting, but actually you've had such a journey of exploration and building relationships and doing innovation with lots of different people in different ways, searching for that way to have the most impact, which I'm tremendously respectful of. And that the world has changed quite a lot in when I can't calculate 17 years back from now. I think it's 2006, but roughly then to now, we've had such a groundswell of regulatory change and such a groundswell of joined upness, I suppose, or approaching joined upness in that space. We saw that happening. Plastics as a movement happen in a wave before climate, and now we're seeing nature and intersectionality arrive as something that's another wave. What's happening in that space? And I guess what can we learn from it, but also what are some of the opportunities there? But then what are some of the blockers? I'd love to explore it as a sector generally, if you're open to that.
Yeah, of course. So I guess we are mainly in the grocery, retail, hospitality, food to go. That's sort of our area. So when we're talking about reusable packaging, that's the area we're talking about. So we're not really in e-commerce, textiles and electronics, which I guess is the other sort of huge impact areas that need solving. Where we're at is there are loads of really, really good trials and pilots happening. And it's exactly as it should have been, because there are really good brands and really good retailers who've said we need to do something about this and we can't wait for the regulation to change to do it. Our customers are asking for it. We know that the status quo can't really continue, but there isn't actually any regulation to force us to do it. So we need to kind of forge our own way. So, and we've been involved in a lot of those trials. The problem is when you talk about such a systemic shift from single use to reuse, it's actually not a first mover advantage play for businesses because it is so expensive. So if you're a brand or a retailer and you want to set up a reuse system, you pretty much have to set up all your own washing, all your own logistics. You have to set up this entire system, which makes it totally not cost effective. So I liken it to the idea that imagine if every supermarket had their own waste management facility, like had their own MRF and had to operate their own lorries and their own MRF. I mean, they'd never be able to afford to recycle anything because it would be preposterously expensive. So I know what we need to get to. Everyone kind of in our sector, in the reuse world, we all know what we need to get to, and the current world of single-use packaging. So what we need to get to is a significant percentage of reusable packaging in the market. Now, that could be 30%, it could be 50%, and I'm talking for consumer packaging. To enable that, what you would see is a sort of superstructure of washing and logistics that would manage all of those items around the system. So I think I did a fag packet calculation. So Greenpeace estimate that we put something like 56 billion units of single-use packaging on the market every year just in UK supermarkets. If you did 30% of that in reuse, which is a very high target compared to what business might expect, but you've also got to think that that's 70% still in single use. So it's really not that much from what the activists might want. I think 30% of 56 billion is something like 360 million containers a week that need to be sold to customers, somehow recovered, moved around the system, washed, cleaned, and sent back to manufacturers, Kellogg's or someone to be refilled, right? That is not going to be achieved by Kellogg's doing a nice little trial in one store. That's going to be achieved by a network of 20 wash stations. It's going to be achieved by lorries, that currently take rubbish from A to B, and then it ends up, in landfill, or not really in landfill, but incinerated or exported or recycled. It needs all of this existing infrastructure that services single use to point towards reuse. And the really good thing is that we know how to do this, right? We have a really good packaging industry that designs really good, world-beating single-use packaging. They can design reusable packaging. We have people who know how to wash things. They can wash reusable packaging. We have people who know how to move things around in a very cost-effective and efficient way. And you usually find that the economic argument mirrors the environmental argument. So if you save costs, you're likely saving environmental impacts as well. So we know how to do all of these things. What we need to do is tilt the existing businesses, and then there will be gaps and there will be a need for new businesses to come in. But we need to tilt them towards this new reality. And having done this for 17 years, I am firmly of the belief that the only way we can do this and tilt everyone in the right direction is through regulation. And that regulation is not punitive regulation. I mean, some businesses might feel it is, because through this thing called extended producer responsibility, businesses are going to be made to pay for the full cost recovery of the materials they put out into the market. So at the minute, we, all of us as individuals, through our council taxes, pay about 10% of the cost of the cleanup of the waste, that comes from packaging, the management, the recycling of it all. We just can't afford to do that. Local authorities don't have any money. They don't have enough money for social care, let alone for doing, for managing what is effectively private companies' waste. There's this idea that you privatize the profits and you socialize the costs through waste. So government already knows that that's going to change. They're bringing in this thing called EPR, extended producer responsibility. What they need to do is go a step further and bring in regulation around reuse. So that would probably look like targets. And we probably need some way of taking the money. So if you imagine that EPR is a bit like a tax, so you pay more money the less good your packaging is. It works as an incentive to make better packaging. But then you could also, it also generates income. So you could be ring fencing monies that come in from EPR and using it to invest in setting up this infrastructure. But unless regulation happens, then everybody can't move together. And the whole industry, whether you're talking about hospitality or food retail, everyone needs to move together. And that's where the regulation comes in. So this is what they're trying to do in Europe at the minute. But there is an intense lobbying campaign from the single-use packaging industry to try and delay or remove those targets.
And that's one of the challenges I think that exists, is lobbying, which slows down the pace of progress, which is slowing down that we can't really afford, I feel. And particularly if we then look at this challenge within the frame of other challenges, so packaging's role or reuse's role within the climate challenge and within carbon and also within nature as well. Also, just like to highlight, we're being beautifully serenaded by birds in the background, which feels like they're really enjoying our conversation or providing a nice backdrop for them.
What's that, wildlife?
Yeah, exactly. So we have this vision, which is centralized infrastructure, a reduction of single-use plastics, effectively more collaboration between organizations and industries that perhaps haven't traditionally collaborated as closely in this way, or have had lines of collaboration but not radical open collaboration, which is what we would need. How's that part going to be solved in your view? Are there moves towards, because critically, this is, as you mentioned, we've got the people, we've got the resources. It's about a fundamental movement of those organizations and resources to a different way of infrastructure. How would that happen in practice? Has there been progress on that? And are there gaps, or because that's fundamental, right?
Yeah. So I would say over the last 5 years, we went from really nothing happening on reuse, and I use reuse in the widest sense. So that could be a reusable packaging system that you pay a deposit for and give back, or it could be a bring your own container. So let's use reuse in the widest sense. In the last 5 years, we went from nothing happening with that to all of these trials and pilots. And now we're at this kind of inflection point where we're all realizing that the trials and pilots are good. They have slightly brought it to the public consciousness, but they're not enough. And radical collaboration is the only way forwards. So where we're moving to, and probably Unpackaged has mirrored this as well, is we went from being, having our own zero waste shops, focusing quite a lot on the independent sector, then starting to work with the bigger businesses. And then really, we're now in sort of Unpackaged. I'd like to say version 2.0, but it's probably about version 18, where actually it's me and 2 co-founders. So my colleagues, Helen and Rob, who bring brilliant different skills than I have. And we are actually focusing Unpackaged effort on collaborative projects. So we don't really want to do any more of those trials. If someone came along to us and said, I want to do a trial of a dog food product in a supermarket, we had always taken the approach where we encouraged them to think about the end goal that they were trying to get to, even if it's in 15 years' time, and then only do trials that help them give the answers to get to that. But really, we don't tend to do those kind of projects anymore. So our biggest project at the minute is the Refill Coalition. And this is emblematic of the kind of projects we want to do. So for the Refill Coalition, pre-pandemic, we got together one of our main supermarket partners and CHEP, who are one of the world's biggest logistics providers. They manage billions of reusable pallets around a global supply chain efficiently, cost effectively. And we got them together and said, how might we solve some of the problems of refill in store? So this is the model of hoppers where people bring their own containers to refill. And I've known for years that we don't want people in supermarkets manually washing and cleaning out these hoppers and filling them with 25 kilo sacks like we all do in the independent sector. And so CHEP said, well, we know how to wash things. We know how to move things around. Why don't we start? So that was the genesis of the Refill Coalition, which is now Aldi, Waitrose, Ocado, CHEP, and then Unpackaged as the glue that holds it together. And using the new capabilities that Helen and Rob have brought to the business, which is all about the sort of innovation work, and then this kind of really gritty supply chain modeling, like how do you actually model out these new systems? We've managed to get this coalition off the ground where we've redesigned that supply chain. So we've now redesigned the hoppers in store. So a cornflakes manufacturer would be able to fill straight into a reusable hopper. It comes out in store. The store staff don't have to worry about washing, cleaning, refilling, all of that. So they can concentrate on what they do best. And then when it's emptied, it just goes back into the supply chain, gets washed, gets cleaned, gets sent back to the cornflakes manufacturer to refill. So that's just an example. And I say we're the glue that holds it together, which massively underestimates how complex and how challenging it is to get an amount of supermarkets to work together. And actually not because the project leads we work with in these supermarkets are brilliant. The way they work together is unexpectedly collaborative. Everyone said, oh, they'll never work together. And they really do, because their needs are aligned, right? So if they work together on this project, then they get the outcome they want, which is a cost-effective refill solution that their customers are asking for. But they've also shared the risk and shared the R&D cost to do so, right? Because they haven't had to develop the whole system by themselves. And the final bit of this project is it's designed along open source standards. So this isn't an unpackaged thing and it's RIP and you have to pay us to have it. Actually, we're birthing this thing. And once it goes out into the world, there might be a role for us in managing it or marketing it going forward. But actually, anybody can use it. It'll be like a beer keg. It's standardized, it's unbranded, anyone can use it. So there are all of these different approaches that we now need to take to enable these big businesses to collaborate together. And if you can align their business needs, then you actually get really good collaboration. But this is just one project tackling ambient dry goods and non-food liquids. We need projects for milk, for chicken breasts, for hummus, for washing up. Like we need all of these projects, soft drinks, we need all of these different sort of specific collaborations that are going to scale this up so that when customers go into shops, they have a viable reuse or refill model that they can engage with.
Are you working to take action on climate, nature, social and sustainability goals? Then you can apply to join our community of action at futureplanet.love. Through an intentional community of your peers and subject matter experts, online and live events, and a knowledge-sharing platform, the Future Planet Community of Action empowers you to share energy and expertise, receive support, find solutions, gain the confidence to make decisions, and collaborate to have a greater impact. To discover more and apply to join, visit futureplanet.love. Right, let's get into it.
Collaboration is a set of human qualities that are required. It's also a set of organizational constraints or limitations or liberations, I guess, depending on the organizational structure. But once one's crossed the threshold of that and gone down a path of figuring out how to get three very large retailers to collaborate, actually you've sort of somewhat set the direction of travel. And the expectation would be that those other ones would fall a lot quicker and a lot smoother, I would imagine, in terms of maybe to have some technical challenges to run through. But a lot of what we notice is that collaboration is how authentic you can be, how open you can be, how much trust you have in the relationship, all of these sort of things, elements. And within these organizations, you're absolutely right. You find these wonderful, passionate change makers like yourself that are in a different part of the systemic structure in another organization. And it's the relationships that they build and the way that they connect that is everything in terms of getting this change to happen and driving change.
Well, I was going to say it all comes down to individuals. So I did some constellations work, which your listeners may or may not be into. And through that work, I suddenly realized that I was trying to fight this system as like a sort of a block, whether it's kind of big business, money, power, status quo. And it became very obvious to me through this exercise that I was going to absolutely kill myself if I carried on trying to do that. And so through this sort of 3-day constellation workshop and there's lots of reconnecting work, I suddenly realized it was all about people. And actually those blocks and those institutions and those systems are still going to exist. But throughout all of them are people who want to change things too. And actually you don't need to worry about fighting the block. You've just got to work with the people, and then working with those people, you can actually change it.
Absolutely. And it's the same as you mentioned at the beginning, right? You were saying, we've got people that are skilled in different areas, and it's just about changing what they approach, what they do. Large organizations are effectively just a group of people that have decided to have a structure that's set in a particular way, which is why I'm so fascinated around governance, KPIs, organizational structures, culture, values as these interesting levers and mechanisms towards transformation. Finding those key individuals in organizations and providing with the support and the resources, but also empowering them with sort of internal social capital. And it's interesting to notice what's needed. Often in those moments, it's like you need something to start a conversation, or a piece of statistics, or a piece of data, or something like that. When you started building those early relationships at the very beginning, how did you approach those relationships, and how did you create those connections, and what were those early conversations like? And then what created them to be successful as you moved through those, effectively building relationships between a small group of people that represented much larger organizations?
God, it's so hard to think back. I think they're all quite different. I think from having done it for such a long time, I'm known as the person who has a very specific point of view. So when I turn up to an event, I mean, everyone kind of knows what I'm going to say in terms of the push towards reuse. I think the reason that we work so well with people in these businesses, well, one of the reasons we work so well with businesses is that we go in quite hard, but in an enabling way, if that makes any sense. So I don't think anyone pays Unpackaged as a consultant to be told what they want to hear or just to be left with a nice PowerPoint telling them what to do. I think they genuinely appreciate the fact that we come in with a point of view, which is, come on, guys, we've all got to solve this problem. But then we use all of our skills to help them think it through. So these businesses are full of people with great ideas. And we use our skills. So my colleague, Helen Clements, is a particularly brilliant facilitator and innovation expert. And so we do these workshops with businesses. And if we deploy Helen and her methodology, we come out at the end of a day with too many ideas to follow up. That's how creative people in these businesses are, because everybody can see how their business can run better or how they might be able to switch out of single use, or they've got an idea of maybe if we did that, or I've been thinking about this. So really what we do is just come in, set the context of like, this is a real problem and it's in your gift to try and do something about it. And then we use our skills to help bring out their own ideas and help empower them to do it. It'll never work if it's just them relying on us to do it for them. We have to empower people to do it with their own businesses. So sometimes we come in with a very big picture play, which might be about their strategic goals. Sometimes it's actually about just supporting one person who's got in touch with us and said, I'm trying to do this thing internally. Can you come and help us? So it's about taking a different approach to different businesses and different individuals. I also think we're quite firm about it because I'm not there to mollycoddle anyone. I'm not there to make them feel good about things that need to change. So there's plenty of other consultants I'm sure they could pay to do that, but I'm not going to waste my time doing that. We go in with the expectation that we're trying to lead to change.
I love that. That's so good. So
is that a low ball? I'm not dissing anyone else.
No, I love it. You're not, but I love it. It's positionality for you. And I feel like we've got to this moment in time. So you and I have been doing this for some time, and there have been multiple evolutions, and there's people that came before us, of course. But it feels like in the last 2 years, and certainly in our circle in the last 2 years, there's been a level of like increased requirement. Probably actually I would call it, since Extinction Rebellion, was a very helpful moment for all of us, in that it suddenly gave everyone permission to be asking much stronger questions, because we weren't as strong as that, but there was a real moment of awakening. And that was followed by a lot more hiring and a lot more resource going into organizations. But it gave us permission to be much more clear. And we also found those allies internally that that's what they wanted to hear. They wanted to hear that clarity, and they wanted to receive that, and they wanted to be supported in that clarity. Because I'm often interested, it's okay to switch people on, but actually what's really required is a determined focus on a hierarchy of impact and also on key intervention points in a systematic way. And so what I love about what you've got with Unpackaged is it's really clear. It's focused on outcomes. It's very, very clear what you're intending to do. And it's very, very clear what you can then scale up from. So once you've done dry goods, you can go to, as you mentioned, other things as well. I think that focus feels fundamentally important. But I'm also curious. So because I think a lot of it's easy to say, oh, we did this project, but I feel like a lot of people that will be listening, their day to day is communicating internally to get sign off for something, or being able to do something that feels harder internally, when actually a lot of the time you face this sort of resistance, both from organizational structure or a lack of time or a lack of money or a lack of resource. And you find these champions that are often somewhat isolated, or they've got a group of people that are with them, but they're varying different degrees there. How are you able to cross that with people? I mean, that would have been a journey, right? With lots of other points, but is there anything that you can share there that would be perhaps a level deeper than one might normally experience receiving?
We don't let anyone get away. I do sometimes joke that we're like the girlfriend or boyfriend that won't let you dump them. We just keep coming back. I think in most of these businesses, there is budget somewhere. And it's really about helping your people internally create the best argument possible for why that budget should be given to them to do this action. I think, there's one way of looking at it, that plastics and packaging is quite a hot topic, although it is really hard within a net zero. So something that I'm working on at the minute is really how we articulate the benefits of reuse within a net zero framework. Because actually, if you were to just look as carbon as a metric for a lot of packaging, your answer would be to put it in plastic because it's resource efficient, it's lightweight. However, I think materials, you can't just take the carbon impact of it because there are so many other negative externalities that are not accounted for in that. But it is trying to get businesses to focus on packaging is a small part of what they have to do for their overall sort of ESG or net zero responsibilities. So we, even though there's been quite a lot of focus since Blue Planet on us and our sector, it's still a real challenge. It's doubly challenging because we have no regulations. So when they know something is coming in, so deposit return schemes, DRS, or net zero, or the plastics tax or things like that, they make changes because they have to, because the regulation is changing. Now, because there's no targets towards reuse, then actually we are still relying on businesses wanting to do it. So it's really about us doggedly helping those people internally to just keep trying to create the right argument. I think one of our particular skill sets at Unpackaged, which has been tested for the Refill Coalition, is constantly finding ways through problems. So when we say, we're the glue that holds the Refill Coalition together, the amount of work and time and brain power that has to go into solving problems, some of which are expected and some of which are not expected. And then you layer on top of that a war in Ukraine and problems in the global supply chain post-pandemic and an energy crisis and a cost of living crisis, which you could call a cost of capitalism crisis. I don't know, it seems like we are where we are for a reason. You've got all of these problems, which make it really, really difficult to push through our kind of projects. So I don't know if I have any sort of grand wisdom as to how we do it, but it's something about our approach and our skill set and just sort of constantly going back, constantly supporting those people internally, and that might be us. Sometimes it's very useful for them to be able to bring us in because we, as you say, with Extinction Rebellion, making us all move harder and deeper. Sometimes we can come in and say things internally within their businesses that they can't. And I'm very happy to take that role if it gets the outcome that we need. Sometimes it's about educating them and empowering them to make the case internally. So they're all different. And I guess that's the one thing that we know is every business is different. So we would never be sort of a consultancy with a model where we just keep delivering the same model. It feels like almost like we start again with every business because every business has to have a bespoke approach. But yeah, it's hard work.
Yeah, it is. And what I love, what I hear is this persistence, consistent problem solving, because that's where we find ourselves in. Being with, not against, so fundamentally important. Like, how can we support people that are working within organizations and how can they support each other as well? And I love the idea about being able to support them to find the budget. And I think that's often one of the biggest challenges in organization is this sort of fight for money and resources within whatever other directions are being pushed to have something to happen. We've noticed recently accurately tracking risk is fundamental. If you've got risk being tracked correctly at a governance board level, then that feels useful. Also, and then what filters down from that? So KPIs and what people are being measured on in terms of what their roles are. I'm also fascinated in how to accelerate it. And I remember working with you on plates in Shambhala and reuse plates, right? And the notion that given the option to reuse something versus than just use something, 5 to 10% of people will optionally do something. And quite often I hear change makers in organizations that are in large organizations openly talk about the need to be able to have effective legislation and regulation so their organization can respond correctly to that. It's sort of the biggest thing that would help them. And so I also feel like there's something in us getting better at being able to coordinate the circumstances that arrive at better legislation, policy or regulation to be able to move. And what would that take? Because I feel like often large organizations have quite a lot of sway. They hire a lot, they employ a lot of people, they pay a significant amount of taxes, they have strong brands, they're established relationships that people take notice much more than an individual standing up. It takes a lot harder for an individual often to get something to happen. And so I'm curious there about what effective collaboration means and which organizations would choose which things to focus on. Because if we look and say 100 organizations have the majority of the impact or something like that, whatever, it's maybe slightly more or slightly less, but we're not a huge order of magnitude bigger than 100 to 500 organizations have the most impact. Actually, between them, one could divide it up and say, well, where are the areas where we feel like we can have the most impact on regulation policy? And how do we then start working within our world in a concerted way? What do we need to make those changes happen? And how does that then connect up? And I feel like that bit's not quite been done. I see it happening in pockets and I see the learning happening in specific spaces, but I feel like there could be much more progress happening if we were to effectively do knowledge sharing and collaboration across those different areas. So the stuff that you've learned in zero waste, in reuse, how do we move that into the knowledge that is what's happening around climate and what's arriving around nature, where these organizations and NGOs are now currently grappling with the same challenges that you were grappling with 4 or 5 years ago, right? And where we can now also see what's happening in the stalling of that process. You know, that like talking to Adam Reed, who's CSO of Sewers and was president of CWM on the last podcast about where that legislative process has got to, where those consultations have got to. There's this sort of moments of like realization as you move through the process. Oh, actually, hang on a minute. We need to course correct a little bit, or we need to take into account that. And I feel there's tremendous value in being able, as a movement, to share best practices across those movements. It's not a question. It's a kind of sort of arriving at a sort of thought as we look at how we can increase our impact. I don't know if that resonates with you. I think it probably will because you're a trailblazer. But like, yeah.
No, it definitely does. So the other side of unpackaged work is really in the policy space, which I guess we've done informally. I think it was part of our original vision or mission. Campaigning for policy change, I think, is what we had somewhere in our strapline. But in recent times, we have become much more educated on what policy is and how it works. So we collaborate a lot with, obviously, yourselves at Future Planet, Greenpeace, City to Sea. So there's a whole load of sort of NGO collaborators. Then there's the world of kind of voluntary agreements. So you've got WRAP running the UK Plastics Pact and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation running the Global Commitment on Plastics. And then you've got government in its sort of sense of DEFRA, BAYS, so, you know, that side of things. And then we also have a relationship with Innovate UK because they fund one of our projects. And Innovate UK is a government funding mechanism to fund the private sector to come up with solutions, some of which are sort of UK PLC commercial solutions and some of which are solving problems. So, you know, they fund us to try and solve one of these problems. So there's this whole sort of work. And then actually within that, despite Brexit, there's a whole European wing of NGOs and what the European Commission is doing and trying to set targets. And then on top of that, you've got the kind of the global picture now, which is that UNEP's trying to set up a global treaty on plastics. So you've got these sort of local to international layers of policy that somehow need to coordinate. It's really hard. We have policy positions. We know what the policy should look like, and we are trying to make ourselves available to DEFRA, to hopefully the incoming Labour government, about how to develop the right policy to support reuse. We share a lot with other NGOs in terms of campaigning, messaging. We probably all have a slightly different angle. I have been talking to the NGOs for a while now about the need to move their members and their positions from an anti-plastic stand to a pro-reuse stand. Because actually, if we had thousands and thousands of members of NGOs saying to businesses, we want reusable solutions instead of we want no plastic, it would make my job a lot easier because I'd have more consumer pressure to respond to. So there's lots of sort of different ways that we work together to do that.
Can we just explore that? So has that happened and why hasn't that happened? Because it feels like such an obvious, like I can just feel the energetic flow of a recommendation rather than a resistance.
It's happening now. I think 2 reasons. I think the answer is it's complicated. So it's an anti-plastic message is very easy. But if we were to move from single-use plastic to single-use glass, that would be an emissions catastrophe because glass is so intensive in terms of making it, transporting it, but it's infinitely recyclable. if we move everything to metal, well, we need bauxite to mine aluminium and all of these things. We don't have enough of these resources. So what the message now needs to be is to move from single use to reuse. So it's, let's stop taking valuable resources and turning them into short-lived items such as packaging, and turn them into reusable items that can be sent around the chain for as much as possible and then only recycled at end of life. So recycling and reuse work in tandem. And it suits the single-use packaging industry to say, oh, we're all coming in trying to replace the heavily invested in recycling industry. It's a nonsense, Even if you make a reusable cup, at some point it's going to have an end of life and it needs to be made of recyclable materials. We will always need recycling, right? So the two things can work together. So I think, as I said, like similarly to the shift that's going from trials and pilots to hopefully radical collaboration, we're now moving away from the anti-plastic message was really useful because it is a more problematic material than others, Its use is so ubiquitous. There's so much of it. You can't function without it in the modern world. And there's so much opaqueness about what recycling is or isn't happening. You know this, your listeners probably know this, but we are recycling between, 2 and 8% of all of that plastic that's ever been produced. And we've got this terrible practice of exporting it to countries that have even less good waste infrastructure and somehow pretending that that's been recycled because there's some sort of paper trail that says that it's been recycled. And actually, lots of it is existing in rubbish dumps in Turkey and Poland and all of these places. So I'm slightly going off at a tangent there, but I think the anti-plastic message was really useful. It was really useful to have these visceral messages of albatrosses with ring poles around their necks and turtles with straw up their noses. But now we need to get a bit more sophisticated. And actually, it's not up to consumers to have to ask for it. I'm allegedly an expert in this field. Even I sometimes look at the plastic and waste and go, Christ, I don't know what bin that goes into. Can I do something with it? The complexity of modern plastic packaging in terms of polymers, what are called multi-material laminates, where you've got all these different types of plastics that are sandwiched together to make this super efficient packaging. It's impossible for consumers or citizens to work out. Business needs to take a lead, supported by government, in providing good solutions and good solutions that are right for different parts of the market. There's huge questions of accessibility when it comes to sustainable packaging options and reuse. If you were to have everything with reuse being some super smart, sexy thing operated by an app on a smartphone, you're going to exclude a massive amount of the population that can't afford to do it. If every piece of reusable packaging has got to have a 50p deposit on it, which you effectively never get back if you're using the system correctly because you keep getting more and more of these reusables. Well, there's families on low incomes that can't afford to have 30 quid or 50 quid of their monies tied up in deposits and things like that. So there's these huge questions that we need to look at and that we need to move towards. And I think that's probably my answer to your question of why it was easier to just have an anti-plastic message, because actually the pro-reuse message is complicated. And there's a final point. You can't have a pro-reuse message if there aren't places for people to go and do it. So if Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth went out and told all of their members to go out and refill tomorrow, well, yeah, there's a load of really brilliant small zero waste shops. But actually, you'd have to live next to a handful of some of the biggest retailers if you wanted to reuse or refill anything within them. So there's a sort of chicken and egg issue going on here.
There isn't. I think I don't disagree with you, but I also being open, transparent, and honest about the journey and the direction of travel and where we're going and the steps. So I think there is simplicity and clarity in that. And I feel like all too often it's easy to say, oh, well, consumers need simple messages so they can understand what to do. And I think that somewhat undermines the intelligence of many people that really would rather have good, clear stuff. Like, who is this kind of homogenous lump of unintelligent people that can only handle single messages that are negative, for example? I'm not sure that's the way the reality is. I think actually where we are right now is a craving for a greater level of simplicity and clarity and openness. So I think if NGOs were to stand up and say, hey, look, so here are the steps towards getting there, and we're here and we need to do this next. Okay, who's with us on this bit? Okay, great, we've done this bit next. So it's classic kind of roadmap approach, and it may be happening already, but I feel like it's not a challenge. I just feel like we don't need to say, oh, it's complicated and this is a perfect vision. I think we can just say, look, this is where we're getting to, and this is an aspiration. And I think, as we were talking before we started recording, people like Kate Raworth are accurately, being able to sketch out what that means, and here's the toolkit and how that you get there. So I would say on that, I think we could probably start communicating that, and I think in some ways we are, probably sooner rather than later. I'll balance that with, it's interesting to notice that in the degrowth movement, with talking to Timothy Free, specifically being able to say, let's dismantle capitalism, gets a lot of airtime. Like the flip side of that is, you're absolutely right. Like, it does get a lot of, like, people find it much easier to talk about something that's against, much more drawn to an against, than they would do, for example, where degrowth is actually not necessarily degrowth. It's just asking for a rebalancing and a changing of the way that we do things in many areas. So I feel I skate between the two there in saying that, but I do think clarity and a clear roadmap and taking people on a journey, and definitely for NGOs, like, I don't know that there's probably some kind of psychology around this, but I don't really want to pay for a teddy bear or pay for something that's amorphous or like visionary. What I really want to do is have a relationship with a group of people that are driving change, and I want to know where they need my support the most. I don't want to do a petition. I want to do something that's effective for them to help them get to do what's done next. And I love what you're sharing, because you're right. The currency that you need when you're in an organization is to be able to say, there are these people here with me that would like to see this change happening. And I think that's fundamental. And it echoes the same as what Jamie Broderick would say about pension funds. It takes a small number of people to change the direction of a pension fund. I think he mentioned something like 13 to 15 tweets to a pension fund manager before they're like, oh, hang on a minute, people care about what I'm investing in. That's old information, but it roughly sees the same. And I think that's what's so curious about the learning of how small and focused these intervention points can really be, and how just having even the simplest of things can really help either build relationships or build currency or build the capacity to get a change to happen. We've moved past the point where you were, passionately sharing, but anyway, what do you think about that moment again?
No, I totally agree. And like you, I can skate between hope and despair about 15 times a day, I think, is where I'm at. But really, we need to get these systems out there. So I was in a meeting and one of the soft drinks manufacturers said that, so DRS, you get in German beer bottles, Coca-Cola bottles in Spain in a bar that go back to Coke to be refilled, things like that. So there is some sort of deposit, there's some sort of packaging, you put it back through some sort of machine and you get your money back, right? So those are all coming. Now, apparently there's loads of research that basically says there's an 8-week shock period where you introduce a DRS system, the general public goes, oh, we don't know what to do with this. It lasts 8 weeks and then they fall into line and then they do it. Now, the minute I heard that, I was like, wow. And yet I sit in meeting after meeting where we discuss the need for behavior change research to prove that customers want reuse. And I could shortcut all of that. Give me your money and I will set up all of the reuse systems and just put them out there. Because if you put them out there, people will use them. We did this with the reusable plates of Shambhala. We had the situation where people had to choose to use a plate, and it was only a trial and it was fine. It didn't have to be perfect. It was only a trial. But if we'd had the opportunity to go back and do it again, we would have worked with those traders 6 to 9 months beforehand. We would have helped them re-establish their processes internally in their trucks to still ensure they can get super quick food out on a reusable plate. And then we would have told Shambhala they needed to make it mandatory. And then everybody just would have shifted over to it. We know how to use reusable things. You don't walk into a pub and think, have they washed this glass? Well, maybe in the odd pub you think, have they washed this glass? But, you don't sit down in a restaurant and immediately wonder about the health impacts of the fork you're going to eat off. We know how to do reuse. We just ended up down this wrong route. And let's be clear, loads of people have made loads of money out of the single-use packaging boom, and it has served everyone really well for a while, but that's because they never had to pay for the impact of it. So my theory is, if you genuinely want to run a decent business, and I'm not even saying it has to be an ethical business, but you have to be able to put your product out there, pay for the effect that it has on the world. And if you still have a profit left over, well, then you're a decent business. I have seen things like examples from like chewing gum manufacturers where they have to set up funds as if they're doing a great thing. When something like 76% of municipal land is littered by chewing gum, It's like, well, no, that's a direct result of your product. So the least you should be doing is paying to clear it up. Why should the local authority be paying to clear it up? But then this gets us on to capitalism and how it probably should work.
So what I hear mostly is bravery. I really agree with you. I think if something becomes the way that it is, that people will move through that. And the friction point we were talking about was lobbying. And another friction point is business model change, like established business model. And so we as an organization, we're much smaller, but that shouldn't really necessarily determine decision making. We decided quite recently to stop everything we were doing and rethink whether we were doing things in the right way, which actually meant leaving money on the table for specific things and meant like not continuing doing things that previously had been successful and served us in a different way. I think that could become harder if you're a large organization to say, oh, we've got this business line or this product line or this thing that we do already, and it's making millions of pounds. I think it could be harder to change. But in reality, there is more opportunity to embrace that transformation and change. Simply if we looked at, for example, like an airline, where we know that airlines are going to need to transition to a cleaner way of being, or perhaps people will need to embrace other methods of travel. Well, so if an airline decides to co-invest in other methods of less carbon intensive travel, then that's a really interesting transformation from being an airline to an organization that helps people to move from A to B in a different way. And I think it's that level of clear-headedness, like radical thinking, and you bringing it right back to the beginning when you said we've got specific sets of skills in specific areas. How do we change them? How do we transform them? It's not a big step for Adam Reed at Suez to rethink how they might change their infrastructure to accommodate reuse. It's not a big step for other organizations in that value chain to think about doing that or plan to do that. There may be some money left on the table, but frankly, that's the cost of transformation. And if you don't make that change and you were accurately pricing the cost of what you were doing into your business and into your products, then you're not fit for the future that we would all want to live in as well. So there's a sort of bravery in needing to make those decisions early, but also then therefore be ahead of the curve that I would love to see, frankly.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, but the challenge is it's within a system that's effectively based on short-termism because it's based on year-on-year growth, year-on-year profits. If you think about when everyone's got to issue a profit warning and what that does to their standing in the market, it's a very hard system for us to move out of, whether it's packaging, aviation, textiles, whatever it is. Everything is so entrenched. We're in this sort of too big to fail era, yet we are about to fail on a species level.
So that's what bravery is. Bravery is grasping the nettle. Bravery is standing up and standing out. Bravery is taking that moment to be the first or one of those leaders. And it's not, we've seen it, like we can see it across a range of B Corp. We've seen it in these case study examples like Orsted, where they've transformed to only do clean energy. Like we have those case studies and reference points. I wouldn't say that doesn't exist. I would say that maybe what's therefore required, to one of your points, is to support those leaders to make that transformation, to support those people to be able to do that work, to give them the capacity to do that, to work out, okay, well, fine, if you had triple bottom line accounting in your business, you'd be probably making a specific set of different decisions about how you're doing, and it gives you the permission to make that change. I think that's possible. Like I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think that was possible.
I think it will be interesting. I don't think it's an either or. Does this come from them being regulated to do it? Does it come from visionary people within businesses who either do it because they want to or can see a competitive advantage for doing it? And I think the answer is we need all of these things.
It's all of those things. Yeah. Yeah. It's all of those things, and learning from the work like organizations and yourself and others have done to lead that change, and then sharing how we can do that in a faster way. Well, it's been such a pleasure to connect with you and to adventure through so many different elements. And what's next for Unpackaged? Like, what's your next moment with Unpackaged? What are you excited about most?
So I think I'm most excited about just the new iteration of Unpackaged, because we're a different type of organization now. It was me doing my thing for a really long time, and as you say, pivoting, surviving, sometimes thriving. And now actually it's such a joy to work with my co-founders and with our team. So we're a team of 5 because everybody brings new skills and it means we can tackle the problem differently and hopefully get bigger impact. So we will continue to focus on the Refill Coalition. Our aim, we've got 3 retailers. We want the whole marketplace. So we're going to launch in September, prove it works operationally, commercially, environmentally. So we'll be working with Eunomia on an external LCA because we're all about transparency. If this model that we're working on doesn't prove to be objectively better on these metrics than the single-use alternative, then we need to stop doing it and go and do something else. There are myriad reuse solutions we could be working on. So yes, we'll be focusing on the Refill Coalition, looking at setting up coalitions in France, Germany, and Netherlands and Benelux, because we're trying to make this a global standard. So really it's how we extend that back into the global supply chain, and then hopefully working on other impactful collaborative projects as well. We'd love to tackle the big hitters: milk, soft drinks, fresh products. We always say if we get to the point that we solve chicken breasts and hummus in reusable packaging, then our work is done.
I love you. I love how you went from small team to grand vision. I love that. And I think a lot of this is going to be small teams with big visions working together. You have invited or called in specific sectors or spaces. Would you like to take the opportunity to name exactly your intentions as to who you would like to work with? Do you feel comfortable doing that? Because I feel like that would enable us to I feel like part of this is about being intentional.
Well, in the Refill Coalition, I would love to have all of our previous members. So we have had members who've been in and left. So M&S, Sainsbury's, Morrison's, I'd love to have them back in. I'd love to have Tesco and the Co-op, who've never been part of it, as well as part of maybe smaller organisations like Budgens and Spar. They have a lot of outlets. So we've got Ocado, Aldi, Waitrose and CHEP with us at the minute. And we just need to get it live in September. And then I honestly think the rest of the market will, if we can prove this works, then why wouldn't they follow suit?
They will.
And then I have a big dream about going back into the festival world, because festivals and events are closed loop. So whether we're talking about Wembley Stadium, Spurs Stadium, Glastonbury, Festival Republic, all of those, we tried to do this foray into it with the reusable plate scheme that you very gamely came and helped me wash plates for. But actually, I want to help them revision it. And what we can do is we can model it out. So we could model out what would it look like for X festival to be 100% reusable by, say, 2030. What impact would it have? What cost would it have? What cost would it save? How would we help the traders do it? So that's kind of how we will iterate. So previously, I was very much a doer. Let's just do something. Let's just get something set up. And now we have the right skills to actually help other businesses do it and prove that it's viable. And I think that's where we're at now.
I love you. So inspiring. Your energy for creating a better impact in the world is just huge. And you're yeah, first of all, we're going to do this in supermarkets. Then we're going to do, maybe we think about Europe and how we can change that. And then maybe some sort of global change. And then also, by the way, I feel like festivals is probably my heart and I want to go and change that. I love you. What an awesome human. Thank you so much for sharing your time today and sharing your stories. And I look forward to many more adventures with you, and hugely grateful for everything that you both give to the world and are as a awesome change maker. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely to chat.
Please rate and share this widely on your social channels. The more people that we can welcome to join us on the journey and support the change makers we champion, the faster we can combat climate change, battle biodiversity loss, and co-create a future we can all love. Where do we go next? What questions did this spark for you? Would you like to know more about a particular topic? Who shall we adventure to? What shall we ask them? Where shall we go? What shall we build? How shall we do this together? Do you have any questions or comments? Join the Future Planet community of action at futureplanet.love to sign in, sign up, and get involved. Together, we can.